Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I have the honor to start today by introducing you to the LIFE project that was already mentioned and to describe the work that we've done on the topic of easements as part of this project. So you see in this picture in the corner there are two other logos, and they are there because this project is the successor of two previous LIFE projects that have been done by ELO and NABU, or led by these two organizations respectively. And in these projects, the topic was also private land conservation, but these two groups have worked separately. And now, as part of the Life ENPLC project, landowners and conservationists have worked together. The project is a 4-year project and funded by the European Commission, as we've already heard. So I will continue with the next slide. So I would like to highlight the partnership that came out of the projects between landowners and conservationists, which are respectively represented by ELO and Eurosite. And in the picture you can see the directors of both organizations probably talking about private land conservation, or maybe dinner, we don't know. So at the end of this project, we will have a couple of small projects to continue the work and make sure that our two organizations keep working together under one shared goal, which is the goal that unites us, and that is nature conservation and protecting what we have. So the project is really all about finding common ground to see how we can work together and how we can find solutions that everyone is happy with. So we're taking into account these different perspectives. Yeah, that's it. So this project, it's in the name, it's all about networks and networking. And in this picture, you see a bit the, let's say, structure that we have. The maybe most important part is the on-the-ground work. These are really the people that are doing the work. And here we have a couple of ambassadors. There's also some in the room, and we will hear them speak later. They are the ones that really make private land conservation tangible. So a lot of the times if people hear the term, they don't know what it actually means. And in those cases, we then start talking about our ambassadors, and then you can see the light bulb and like, oh, okay, so that's what it is. At the same time, we have the 18 project partners in the European countries, and these project partners are our local anchor points. They keep us updated on what is going on in their countries and connecting us to regional policies and enable the exchange between countries to learn from each other. Then on the EU level, that's Eurosite and ELO, the CLC that I introduced previously. And we also have a global partner, which is the International Land Conservation Network. And this organization enables us to also have exchange with other continents, so even on a broader scale. And through the network, we also connected to the speakers that we will hear in the later sessions from Australia. So you see, we're all working together. Let me quickly introduce to you what we've done in the project. So the project, as I've mentioned before, it's all about advancing private land conservation. And so partners have been sitting together to think about, okay, what are the key areas that we need to work on to really advance the topic? And these are lessons learned from maybe the US, where they said, okay, these are the things that we are doing as an organization. And then we draw some lessons from that, and we identified these 5 topics. The first one is funding, and here I'm talking about incentives for landowners, but also the support for NGOs to be able to do this kind of work. Knowledge, of course, that's a really important element, and in the project we've been working on training, guides, basically collecting information. Some countries have more knowledge on certain topics, so we extract that, we bring that to the EU level, and we can then distribute it to other countries. Awareness, I think, is a very important one, and here again, our ambassadors are at the heart of this action. We've also done some on the groundwork, working with volunteers on private land. NGOs, they're quite used to working with volunteers on their land. It's less known or less common to do so on private land. So the project was experimenting with that to see how we can bring basically these kind of actions on the private land as well. And finally, tools, and that's also the topic of the day. And yeah, conservation easements would be one of these tools. So I'm driving right into the next slide. So here you have basically an overview of tools that we've been looking at as part of this project. And one thing that became very clear is that you need a toolbox. So conservation easements are great, but that is really only one tool. And landowners, they have different needs. They usually have a business model around their land, and it differs quite a lot as to what they need and what they can work with. So for conservationists, it's great to have this sort of toolbox to see, okay, what fits with which landowner. And so in the project, we've, for example, created an overview of what are the most commonly used tools in different European countries, and then also look at what are the similarities, because they're not always called the same. And so we also looked at synergies and how you can combine certain tools. I have a case study later on that shows how these tools can also work together at different stages. And so today we'll focus on conservation easements, which is one of these tools. So I will give you a short review of what we have done in the project on the topic and also draw some lessons learned from it. Okay, sorry, I am lost in my slides a little bit. But with these slides, I wanted to give you a quick review of what easements are. Essentially, there are voluntary conservation agreements, and they restrict use rights. So what does that mean? I really like the metaphor of a bundle of sticks. So as a landowner, you basically own this bundle of sticks, and it means you can do certain things on your land. You have responsibilities, certain responsibilities. And with a conservation easement, you take away one of these sticks and you give them to a conservation organization on certain, for example, to protect a meadow, or not do grazing, And there are a couple of characteristics that stay the same across different European countries, and these are that the conservation easement is connected to the property title, so it is not bound to the owner but to the land itself. It's a long-term agreement. In the US, it's in perpetuity. I think in France there's a legal limitation to be 99 years. There can be a compensation for landowners connected to that. In the US, that's tax incentive, which is also which has been identified by a previous life project as a very desirable tool for private landowners. There is flexibility, so these easement contracts, they can be set up on a case-by-case basis. And in some cases, there can still be economic activities on the land as long as it works with the nature protection targets. Right, so in the project we have tested on 10 test sites in 7 EU countries these agreements, and in general we had mixed results. So we signed some agreements, and some agreements were also successful, and I would say that relates as well to the fact that the countries are in different stages. So some countries have the legal basis, they've had it for a couple of years already. In France, the legal base or the OIEs were introduced, but they're relatively new, so not yet as much worked with. And in some countries, there's also a missing legal basis. And some other outcomes that we had as well was that we signed conservation agreements that were not conservation easements, which also shows again the need for a toolbox, because you see like, oh, maybe the easement wasn't actually the right tool in this case. So here you have a map of the successful examples that we had, and these were signed by XCN, our Catalan partner, Natuurpunt. We have as well someone in the room that was working on that, ELO, NABU, and our Czech partner. So this is an example that I want to highlight, which is the Catalan example. So this conservation easement was signed in Catalan, and the area, which is also very important, has some nature values that are important for the organization that signed this agreement, because they will be connected to this land for a very long time. And what's interesting about this example is that the costs of the easement were covered by an insurance company, which in exchange was able to do some CSR and involve their employees on the land. So that's how they benefited from the agreement. And this example also illustrates how these tools can work together, because in this case, they used a stewardship agreement and converted that into an easement. And the idea was that stewardship agreements are for a shorter time, so they can help to kind of ease people into the partnership, build some trust, show what is being done, and then once they know what it means, then they're usually also more interested in signing a long-term agreement. Okay, so that's my last slide. So I would want to talk to you quickly about some barriers and some solutions. So the first thing is that it's still a relatively new concept in Europe, so there's quite some skepticism, and landowners are insecure of what it really means to sign an easement. So at the beginning, it's quite difficult sometimes to sign these agreements. There's also still a lack of awareness. So what does it really mean? Maybe a lot of people are not even aware that this is an option that they have or that it exists. There are conflicting interests, which make the negotiations or can make them a bit difficult, because you have to try to find a common ground and make an agreement that works for everyone. And there's also some hesitation because there is a very long time frame connected to it, usually. There are shorter easements, but most of them are very long, so people are a bit hesitant in that regard. Then, and that is a big one as well, there's still some legal uncertainty on how the process works or what happens if an easement gets contested. And there are in some countries some legal barriers, so maybe there's missing legislation, or it's not been tested yet if a legislation can be used for nature conservation as well, if it has a different original purpose. And in many countries there's also a lack of financial incentives or low financial incentives, so landowners are less inclined to get into these agreements. There's also in some cases, for example in Spain, very high transaction costs. So that's as well a barrier, and I think that maybe over time these would decrease, but especially at the beginning they can be quite high. Also, if you talk to a legal person, I know that's not the right word, they may not know what easements are, so they need to learn first how to work with them, so it takes more time, it's more expensive. And then in some cases, the nature NGOs also have limited resources, so they cannot sign all the agreements that they might want to sign or work on all of them. And then that there's also some concerns about becoming ineligible for other grant programs, because there may be some criteria, and you could be worried, and in some cases it's true, that you don't qualify for something else anymore. So there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. So my last point, there will be some solutions, or we found or thought of some solutions as well to these concerns. And probably the most important one is education and training for notaries, that was the word I was looking for landowners, for everyone involved, to basically show examples, because we can look across to the US and we can show them how it would work out, raising awareness, highlighting some case studies so people can see, oh, it worked there, it might work for me as well. Key one as well is having good relationship and trusts between all of the partners. And that means there needs to be a lot of personal contact. In some cases, lots of coffee has to be drunk. Improvement of incentives is also something that will drastically accelerate the process. It will take time. Creating easements can take longer than buying land, but in the long term there are other benefits for it, so it's worth it in some situations. And you have to identify the early adopters. These are the front runners that are interested in trialing out these new concepts. And that's it. Okay, thank you very much.